Okay, so today we are looking at Revelation 3, the message to the church in Philadelphia, verses 7 through to 13. Does somebody want to volunteer to read that for us? Revelation chapter 3, verse 7 to 13.
I can, if you like.
Thank you.
And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these things saith he that is holy, he that is true, he that hath the key of David, he that openeth and no man shutteth, and shutteth and no man openeth. I know thy works. Behold, I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. For thou hast a little strength, and hast kept my word, and hast not denied my name. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee. Because thou hast kept the word of my patience, I also will keep thee from the hour of temptation, which shall come upon all the world, to try them that dwell upon the earth. Behold, I come quickly. Hold that fast which thou hast, that no man take thy crown. Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out. And I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, which is New Jerusalem, which cometh down out of the heaven from my God, and I will write upon him my new name. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches.
This is the message to the church in Philadelphia. Now, as we've looked at, each one of these churches represents a part of the Christian age, from the first century right down to the second coming. Last time, we looked at the church of Sardis, which was the Reformation church, the Reformation and post-Reformation churches that had a name to be alive, but were dead. Philadelphia is the next stage of the Christian church following that. It covers the period that we refer to as the Great Awakening. Following on these Reformation churches that had this claim that they were Bible-based, that they were getting back to the truth. But in reality, they were quick to establish creeds and the same man-made structures that were in the churches that they left and they opposed. But something started changing in the Great Awakening with the Moravian movements, the Pious in Germany, the Methodists. There was not just this Reformation, there was revival. And Philadelphia covers this age. It started with this revival, this Great Awakening that started happening throughout the Christian world. Now, the first thing we're going to look at is, how does Jesus introduce himself to this church? There are 3 points. He says, he that is holy, he that is true, he that has the keys of David, he that openeth and no man shutteth, and shutteth and no man openeth. Now, what do you think the significance is of Jesus presenting himself as he that is holy?
Divinity.
Absolutely. That's an attribute of divinity, that God is holy. That's why at the burning bush in Exodus 4, when Moses, in the presence of God, he had to take his shoes off his feet, for the place where he was holy, because the presence of God sanctified everything around him.
He also remained holy when he was on earth.
There's something I really like in the Gospel of Mark particularly. He puts together a whole bunch of stories. Jesus casts these unclean spirits out of the demoniac into the swine, which are unclean animals. Then there's a woman who was unclean that had a flow of blood for 12 years that he heals. And this 12-year-old girl who was dead, who is unclean, and he touches. And Mark puts a whole bunch of these stories together where Jesus comes in contact with all these different people and different animals and stuff that are all unclean. Now, going by the Mosaic law, any one of those meant Jesus would have had to be unclean to go outside the city and wash. Okay, that coming into contact with that would have made anyone else unclean. But that's not what happens. When Jesus came in contact with all of those things, he didn't become unclean, they became clean. The man was cleansed, those demons left. You know, the woman was healed, the girl was raised back to dead. That Jesus is a source of holiness to cleanse away all sin and uncleanness. So yes, him being holy speaks of his divinity. Him being holy speaks of, like you say, his purity. He's a fountain of holiness and cleanliness for us to come to. What about the next thing he says? It says, he that is holy, he that is true. What is the significance of Jesus presenting himself as he that is true?
Would that go with John 14:6?
Yep, do you want to read that out for us?
Where he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me.
Yep. So he's the way, the truth, and the life. That he is the ultimate truth that we're to lead and to follow. Petra.
Just looking at the original word, it says real, genuine, which is different or distinguished from true as one who cannot lie. So the focus of that word that's translated true here is that he is real and genuine.
I actually share my screen for a minute. You can all see Esau here. All right. What I'm going to do here, where it says he that is true. Okay, I'm just going to highlight this word for true and just do a quick search in the New Testament. Now, just give me a thumbs up. Can you see this search panel up here that's come up with all the results?
It's a little,
Excellent.
little.
I don't know if that's helping.
Better.
Better? All right.
Yes.
Just notice that the context in which this is used in the gospel, it talks about, you know, talking about Christ, that was the true light that cometh into the world. The true worshippers shall worship the Father. Herein is that saying true, one soweth another reaps. The true bread, okay? Jesus says, he that sent me is true. He is the true vine, the only true God. You know, and if you go through, it's used in that in a lot of ways. This is again, the living and true God. Okay, he that sent me is true. The sanctuary, figures of the true. Draw near with a true heart. This word true, as Petra mentioned, it's using these conjugates, it's meaning, you know, the real one. As opposed to the other word for true that's used often, meaning factual. Okay, where it talks about, you know, someone bearing a true witness. It just means they're reporting the facts. But here Jesus presenting himself as he that is true. It's the real, the genuine. Okay, it's you could say the ultimate antitype to all things. What everything was pointing towards. The answer to all of the problems we have here. Yes, Galen?
I'm just thinking it's interesting that in that list there was John 17:3,
Hmm.
where, as Petra pointed out, that it was genuine. So Jesus is saying that his Father is the only genuine God, not just true, but genuine. That's interesting.
Hmm. It definitely is. So Jesus is presented as he that is holy, he that is true. And then we have he that has the keys of David, he that openeth and no man shutteth, and shutteth and no man openeth. Now, can I get someone to read out Isaiah 22, verses 20 to 22? Isaiah 22, verses 20 to 22.
And it shall come to pass in that day that I will call that I will call my servant Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, and I will clothe him with thy robe and strengthen him with thy girdle, and I will commit thy government into his hand, and he shall be a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and to the house of Judah. And the key of the house of David will I lay upon his shoulder, so he shall open and none shall shut, and he shall shut and none shall open.
So this is the passage that Jesus is referring back to here. Now, in context, if we jump back up to verse 15, I mean, there's a whole long prophecy here, but I'm just going to read a snippet from verse 15 onwards. It says, "Thus saith the Lord God of hosts, go, get thee into the treasurer, even unto Sheba, which is over the house, and say, what hast thou here? And whom hast thou here? That thou hast hewn thee out a sepulchre here, as he that heweth him out a sepulchre on high, and that graveth an habitation for himself in the rocks. Behold, the Lord will carry thee away with a mighty captivity, and will surely cover thee." So it's been speaking about a lot of the unfaithfulness of Israel leading up to this. And it talks about this treasurer that is in charge of the storehouse has been misusing God's funds, been misusing all the offerings or whatever. He's using it to get himself rich, to buy himself this great big sepulchre and this fancy tomb for his burial. And it carries on talking about the unfaithfulness, but then it changes. And God's talking about when he will turn it. And he says, his servant, Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, that he will strengthen him. And one of the things he will do is the keys of the house of David will be laid upon his shoulders, so that he may open and no one shuts, and he will shut and no one will open. That he will be given a faithful stewardship over the house, over the treasury. And when he opens those storehouses, no one will be able to shut them. When he shuts it, no one will be able to open it. It will be completely under his control. So this is the Old Testament passage that it's referring to. It's referring to the storehouses of the house of David. And so now jumping back into Revelation, when Christ is speaking to his church, and he says, now I have the keys of David. I have the keys to the heavenly storehouse. When I open these doors, no one can shut them. When I shut the doors, no one can open them. What is the comfort and the promise given to God's people when Jesus presents himself like that? I suppose that the comfort and the caution.
He's in charge. He doesn't answer to anyone on earth. And if he says, and he supplies, he will, 23rd Psalm, to abundance. But when he says no, it's a no.
Mm. Yes, Ralph.
Could this be applied to the door being shut on the Jewish sacrifices and feasts and all that sort of thing as well, and opening the new and living way for his believers after the cross?
Yeah, I suppose in a secondary sense it can, because there's that same thing, in Matthew 28, Christ is given all authority. In Hebrews 11, he rules as a son over his own house. When he said, your house is left unto you desolate, that the Jewish economy, the sacrificial system, the sanctuary, all that stuff, that ended, that door was shut. People could no longer come to God through that avenue, and the new and living way was open. So I suppose in a broader sense, yes, that same idea applies, across Scripture. Something that also stands out to me with this is there's the that verse, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman watches in vain. It's that idea that we need to be following Christ and in tune with him. Okay, he has the keys to the storehouse of heaven. Okay, if we are in tune with him and he follows and he opens that up, he will provide for every necessity. Okay, for everything we need to open the way, it is open to us. But if we are trying to build this on our own or go out on our own, okay, it won't succeed. Okay, we can't force him to open that and support our plans. We need to be following his plans and going along to his will. Ian.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the Ezekiel, I think it's chapter 8, where he in vision Ezekiel sees there's a door, there's like a hole in the wall to the tabernacle, to the temple area, and there's this alternate route, which is that like a hole that he shows Ezekiel and says this is, and so someone's tried to go through another way to get to eternal life. They've tried to make a new door other than Christ. I don't know if you've seen that before.
Yes. That reminds me of I think John 10, when Jesus says, he is the door of the sheepfold. Through him the sheep enter and come out. Or anyone who comes not by the door is a thief and a robber. And he speaks about those that try to come in without going through the door.
Your alternative door that you mentioned there, Ian, brings up for me the Trinity.
Yeah, well, it's like there's somebody else. There's always somebody else, and in that doctrine, there's somebody else that can save you. There's someone else who can take you to the Father, and in this vision, the women are at the north gate. They're crying out to Tammuz, which in the ancient, I'm not sure what culture it was, but there was Nimrod, Semiramis, where the sort of the two that had a son called Tammuz, and Tammuz was the literal son. They believe the literal son was the son of Nimrod and Semiramis, and the son was this third person of the god trio. So an interesting prophecy that Nada does a good sermon on. Yeah, if you can catch it, it's called Biblical 911, I think.
Hmm.
That's where the hot cross buns come from, don't they? With Tammuz on the top of them.
Hmm. I'll just read out a couple of verses earlier on in Isaiah 22, before it talks about the storehouse and the keys of David. And again, it's speaking about Israel and what's going on. It says in verse 9, so Isaiah 22, verse 9, "Ye have seen also the breaches of the city of David, that they are many. And ye gathered together the waters of the lower pool. And ye have numbered the houses of Jerusalem, and the houses ye have broken down to fortify the wall. Ye made also a ditch between the two walls for the water of the old pool. But ye have not looked unto the maker thereof, neither had respect unto him that fashioned it long ago." And so in there you have this idea that in Isaiah here, they've seen the breaches in the wall of David, they've seen that the damage to the place, and they're trying to rebuild it. Okay, but he's saying, but you have not looked unto the maker thereof. They're trying to build it back according to their own ways, not according to God's ways. And so that's one of the big messages here with Jesus quoting from that passage, that he has the keys of David. He opens and no one shuts. He shuts and no one opens. That the gospel work is only going to go out, the blessings of heaven, if it's done according to his ways. We need to look to Christ to have that revival and reformation, to be restored as a people, and to walk in his ways, to have that primitive godliness. Now, following on from this, Jesus begins to give his appraisal of the church. He's introduced himself, and now he begins to speak about the church. Now, one thing that you may have noticed when this was first read out is that he has nothing bad to say about the church in Philadelphia. The entire message of the church of Philadelphia is promises and commendations. Does somebody want to read just verse 8?
I could read that. "I know thy works, behold, I have set before thee an open door. No man can shut it, for thou hast little strength, and have kept my word, and have not denied my name."
Now, one thing I find interesting about this is he says, "I know thy works." Now, in many of the previous churches, he says, "I've known thy works," and then he talks about the works, their patience, their faithfulness, their endurance, their love, or the things they were doing bad, that thou hast a name, that thou livest but are dead. Here, he says, "I know thy works," and then he just goes on to the promises that he has for them, and then gets back to talking about his works. With this church, he is constantly putting his promises before them to lead them and guide them. Now, as to that promise, "I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it." What do we think that this open door means? We've looked before about Christ providing in the beginning, but is there an extra application to this open door specifically for the church in Philadelphia?
I believe it's opening communication.
Mm-hmm.
Is it into the most holy place?
Yep. So open communication. You want access into the most holy place. Is there any other things that the open door could represent?
It's interesting that in the next one, it's the opposite. It's closed, which is a
Meaning
lack of,
to
which is a lack
Laodicea?
of, yeah, which is a lack of communication.
Hmm.
There's no, Christ isn't there. So in this one, he is there.
Mhm.
To me, it sounds like the gates of New Jerusalem, in a way as well, that will never be shut day or night.
Mm. There are a couple of verses throughout the New Testament we're going to look at about open doors. Can we turn to John chapter 10? We referenced this before, but John 10 verse 9. Does someone want to read that out?
I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. Oh, that was 9.
Yep, that's good.
You want 10 too?
No, John 10 verse 9 is fine.
Oh, yeah.
So here Jesus presenting himself as the door that is open to his sheep. And as Margaret mentioned, that here is this Jesus being this open door that allows us access to heaven, to the heavenly blessings, that we may come in and out to feed and find pasture. We have access to God through Christ. Yes, Petra?
The in and out is interesting when we look at it from the point of a sheepfold. They went out and they were active during the day, just as we have possibility to go out and interact with people and bring his truth out to people to see. But the sheep, when it was nighttime, when it was dangerous, they went into a safe place. And it's just, to me, clarifying, I can't remember how that verse goes, something about come aside to a, what was it, a private room? I don't know, something about come aside and wait for a while in a room until the problem's passed. That's a very general paraphrase. Somebody might know the verse. So I get the same picture here. You know, there are seasons, and he's with us in each of the seasons, but he's provided that safe place when we need it, in our minds or physically, wherever.
Mm-hmm. Does someone want to turn to Matthew chapter 7? And read out verses 7 and 8.
Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened.
So here in this, Jesus is teaching about prayer, about following God. Okay, and he talks about there being an open door. When we ask, seek, and knock, it will be given, we shall find, and the door will be opened. Now, I find this interesting as well, what you mentioned before, Galen, about Philadelphia having an open door before them. But in the next church, Laodicea, that we're going to look at next week in a bit more depth, there's a closed door. But it's interesting that in Laodicea, the door is closed from the church's side. Jesus is the one knocking, wanting them to open. Here, Jesus tells us if we knock, he will put an open door before us. So we've got the open door in John 10 representing access to God. Here, an open door representing, answers to prayer. And does someone want to turn to Acts 14?
Just on that, sorry, just on that being the door. I was reading somewhere, I don't know where it was, about the shepherds. They actually didn't have a gate on the sheepfold. They actually at night time lay across the actual way in, so they knew if anything came in or went out, which I found quite a striking picture, that they were the actual door to the sheepfold. You know, by sleeping there, they knew what was happening.
Hmm. That is interesting. I haven't heard about that, but that is a very real picture of the shepherd is the actual door to the sheepfold. That's interesting. Yes, Petra?
So that would tell us that the Church of Philadelphia was seeking and had already knocked because the door is open.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, well, to me, it brings to mind a little bit of the transition from the church in Sardis to the church in Philadelphia, from the church of the Reformation to the church of revival. You know, they got the truth, but they stopped seeking. You know, God revealed a little bit of truth at a time to the different reformers, and they started out, but they got this truth, and then they just enshrined the truth. It's almost like they were worshiping the truth rather than the one who is truth. You know, worshiping the law rather than the lawgiver, worshiping the particular doctrine rather than the one who led them to understand that. And so they didn't have this continual seeking, this continual asking, this continual desire to follow God and to be led daily. And that's something that we see in Philadelphia, that we see from this you know, revival movement. But as much as I'm criticizing the Reformation for that stance they took from constantly becoming stagnant, it is interesting, I find, that Reformation had to come before revival. That they had to get, you know, this almost this theory of truth. There's this theory that we're getting back to the Bible. Okay, we want the Bible truth. That once that was established, then the revival happened in this next church age in Philadelphia. Galen.
Could it also be that they have knocked and the door has been opened for them? Would it could it also be that Christ is the head of the church and they are actually seeking him and allowing him to lead and to be in that position, to be, you know, the head of the church and to follow where he leads? You know, this is the way, walk ye in it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Petra.
Also the order that Christ does it with us. He reforms us with a new heart within, and that revives us.
Hmm. Does someone want to read Acts 14, verse 27?
Now, when they had come and gathered the church together, they reported all that God had done with them and that he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles.
So this open door here is the missionary opportunities, the missionary fields that God had opened before them so that the gospel could go out. So we've got, so far we've got the open door representing access to God, answers to prayer, and also the opportunity to evangelize, to share the gospel, to missionary works, to spread. And these are all the things we see happening with the Great Awakening, with this revival movement. with the Moravians, the Methodists, the Pius in Germany. In this time, these people were following God. The testimony that you hear of the missionary extents that a lot of these people went to, that they're still in missionary stories today. How much they sacrificed. I remember reading it about some Moravians. They were called to witness to the slaves. They actually sold themselves as slaves because it was the only way that they could get in there and share the gospel to them. So these free people went and sold themselves as slaves so they could go and share the gospel to the other slaves, because that was the only way they could actually get in there to do it. Just imagine that kind of that faith, that missionary zeal, where you just have this desire to go. God's opening the doors and you're just walking through them, and the only thing that matters to you is the glory of God and the gospel of Christ. Galen.
I didn't know if you spotted that Mark had a question in the chat.
No, I didn't. Mark said, to the non-SDAs, what is their take on this? I'm not 100% sure. I know a lot of other Protestant churches, at least, have a similar understanding as we do on the 7 churches in Revelation. After that, we start disagreeing very widely and very, very rapidly. But with the 7 churches covering these 7 time periods, although there are some differences about what applies to exactly what, I think in general, there's a certain level of consensus. I wouldn't be able to go into detail on exactly what points they are, though. But just thinking about that as well, even a lot of the establishment churches at the time when the Methodists and Moravians were doing their work, who were against them and fighting against them and attacking them, a lot of those churches later on acknowledged that God was leading those movements and accepted, like the Wesleys and the Moravians, as doing God's work, and sort of accepted that they were in need of revival. Now, if we jump back into the book of Revelation, there's one more open door that we find in Revelation chapter 4. Does someone want to read Revelation 4, verse 1?
I can read it. After this I looked, and behold, the door was opened in heaven. The first voice which I heard was as it were of a trumpet talking with me, which said, "Come up hither. I will show thee things which must be hereafter."
So the very next scene John sees is a door opened in heaven. And he's caught up in vision, and he goes up into there, and he enters into this throne room scene. What does he see in this scene, in the beginning in chapter 4, in those next few verses?
The door opened in heaven.
And when he enters in through that door, what does he see in there?
Throne room of God, Almighty God.
Yeah.
Father. And some living creatures and some elders, and some descriptions of colors and things that he can see there.
So he sees it just gives a description of God seated on his throne, and the 24 elders seated on their thrones round, and there's this big worship scene. And this carries on right into chapter 5. Because in chapter 5, something happens. That there's a problem that the one seated on the throne has this book in his hand that no one can open, and John weeps. Then one of the elders comes to him and says, "Don't weep." In verse 5, he says, "Weep not. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the book and to loose the 7 seals thereof. And I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne and of the 4 beasts, and in the midst of the elders, stood a lamb as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth to all the earth. And he came and took the book out of the right hand of him that sat on the throne." So what we've got here, John has seen this open door, and he goes into this open door and he sees the Ancient of Days seated upon his throne. Okay, and then he sees the Son of Man, or the described here Christ as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and this lamb that had been slain, come to the one seated on the throne and taking this scroll out of his hand and begins to unwrap it. Now, we're going to jump to Daniel chapter 7, because in Daniel 7, there is a very similar scene to this. Daniel 7, can I get someone to read out verses 9 and 10, and then verses 13 and 14?
I'll read it if you like.
Yep.
9, 10, 13, 14.
Yep, that's it.
I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame. Its wheels are burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. And verse 13, I was watching in the night visions, and beheld one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed.
So did people catch a lot of the parallels between what we're reading here in Daniel 7 and what we see in Revelation 4 or 5? In both visions, we have thrones cast down. In both, we have the Ancient of Days, or this description of God seated upon these thrones. We have the Son of Man, or the Lion of the tribe of Judah, approaching unto the throne to receive something from the one who's sitting on it. Okay, Revelation is pointing back to this vision in Daniel 7, but it's taking 2 chapters to describe what Daniel was describing here in these 4 verses. So it adds a lot more detail. But one thing Daniel tells us about here that we don't get directly out of Revelation is the timing of what event this is. This is the beginning of the judgment. This passage in Daniel 7 links to Daniel 8, which talks about the cleansing of the sanctuary. This is the beginning of this investigative judgment. So it's just reading the chat there, just catching up on what's been said. Yeah, this is the beginning of this investigative judgment. So the door that John sees opening in Revelation 4 is the door to the holy place at the beginning of the Day of Atonement that has started. That's what Daniel is seeing here in chapter 7. That's the same thing John's seeing in the book of Revelation. And that also gives us an indication of where, for this church in Philadelphia, this open door that is placed before them, I think it includes everything that we've looked at, okay? It is communication to heaven, answered prayers. It is access to God, Okay, it is the reception and a channel to receive light and truth from heaven. It is God opening missionary opportunities to share the gospel and to spread the truth. And it is also happening at this time when the most holy place is open, when the Day of Atonement has begun, when Christ has entered into that most holy place and the judgment has started. So this is the first promise that Christ gives to them. And we've spent a fair bit of time just looking at this one promise. But you know, when I was going through the church of Philadelphia, one of the things that stood out to me is just how much, you know, Christ is saying to it. Everything is just promise and then commendation, and promises and commendations. So he says, behold, I've set before thee a door, and no man can shut it. And I just find that last bit there interesting. You know, what it means that Christ put an open door before us, okay? And no one can shut it. No one can take this away from us. Okay, it doesn't matter what happens on earth. Christ has opened that door to us. We have access to heaven. No one can take that away from us. And then he gives the reason, for thou hast a little strength and hast kept my word and has not denied my name. They have been faithful. They have not denied his name. They have kept true to his word. Even though they've been doing this through hard times, they have a little strength. Okay, there's not a great people, not great resource, not great strength, but still through their hardships, they have been faithful. Then we carry on in verse 9. Behold, I will make them that are of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews, and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee. Now here we've got the synagogue of Satan being mentioned again. We saw them earlier into the church of Smyrna, when God's people again were being persecuted. And it's interesting that the church of Smyrna also had no rebukes against them. So does the church of Philadelphia. And in both these churches that are pure, that have no rebukes against them, we see the synagogue of Satan also being present there. It's almost like when God's churches are the most pure and following him, Satan's opposition is the strongest. Satan set up his own church that is there opposing God's people. Yes, Ralph.
What does this have to do with, I can't remember where it is, Isaiah or Ezekiel, where the, those people come and ask, can we be dressed with your clothes and take your name or something? Can't think of it now.
I know the one you're talking about. I'll just do a quick search, see if I can find it. Sorry, my computer's lagging. I think my Bible software is just frozen.
Oh,
There's also here the promise, because some people get quite concerned about even the very elect can be deceived in the last days, and some people get stressed about that. But here is the clarity that the true and the counterfeit are there next to each other, and yet God's church is still true.
Mm. It makes me think of if we jump back to the Gospel of John, chapter 8. in here, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees. And in John 8, verse 42. All right. John 8, verse 42. Jesus said unto them, if God were your father, you would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God. Neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not understand my speech, even because you cannot hear my word? Ye are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. And because I tell you the truth, you believe me not. You know, those are some very strong words Jesus is speaking. He's saying that the religious leaders of that day, you know, they're children of their father, the devil. He says similar things in a couple of places. In Matthew 23, he talks about when they go into evangelism, that they go and compass land and see to make one proselyte. And when he is made twofold the child of hell as yourself. You know, Jesus is saying in here that Satan is running their religion. Okay? These are people, they're claiming to be following God, but Satan is the one in charge of their religion. And if we jump back to John chapter 5, I find this in John 5, verse 38. 38 to the end of the chapter here. I just want to notice that the things that Jesus says here that really sums up what was wrong with their religion, why they couldn't follow God, okay, why they were being led astray. It says, and ye have not his word abiding in you, for whom he has sent, him ye believe not. Search the scriptures, for in them ye think ye have eternal life, and they are they which testify of me. And ye will not come to me that ye might have life. I receive not honor from men, but I know you that ye have not the love of God in you. I am come in my Father's name, and ye receive me not. If another shall come in his own name, him ye will receive. How can ye believe which receive honor one of another, and seeketh not that honor that cometh from God only? And I really find Christ summing up that last verse. How can you believe which receive honor one of another, and seeketh not that honor that cometh from God only? That was the big problem. Well, there were many big problems with the church at that time, but I think that's one of the key ones. They were seeking honor one of another and not solely focus on the honor that comes from God only. And that led them to, you know, this selfishness, to establish a religion that was based on the honor of worldly things, based on the honor of status, of prestige. And that's why Jesus said, Satan's in charge of your church. They, at that time, were the synagogue of Satan. Okay, we see the same thing coming up throughout the Christian age, in the church at Smyrna and in the church of Philadelphia. When God's people are pure and following him and being revived, God has nothing bad to say about them, no rebukes to give them. But he's looking at the establishment churches at the day, those that are seeking the honor of men, the honor of the world. And he's saying that they are the synagogue of Satan. They are the ones standing in the way of the gospel. If you read through, you know, throughout the Bible, the biggest opposition to the truth has always been the church. It's always been those in charge of God's organization. But for this time under the Church of Philadelphia, they were free from that. Everyone was following God as ministers going forth, and Christ had no rebuke to say to them. But he turned to the establishment churches and called them the synagogues of Satan.
Yeah, we've got it today. They seem to be running after the Sunday keeping theologians to get their pretty words in that when we have the spirit of prophecy in the Bible, you know, the word of God. Why do we need to go running there when we have everything we need?
That's one of the things that, I mean, it was happening before I was at college, and still after I've left, but one of the changeovers that was happening while I was there is Avondale College really wanted to get university accreditation. Okay, because it was simply just a college. It didn't have its own university accreditation, and they wanted university accreditation. And in their minds, if our pastors have a university qualification, then it means that they'll be more credible to the other churches into the world. And so more people will come and join the church because our pastors have degrees that say from a university. And to me, and to a lot of the other students there that were talking about this, that is just exactly what Christ was saying there. They're seeking honor one of another. They're seeking to be honored, okay, of the other people in the world. But that's not how the gospel goes forth. That's not how the church is going to grow, because people see the qualifications of our ministers. It's because people hear the truth of the gospel. And so they're putting the focus on the wrong thing. And that's been a big snare that Satan has put on his church throughout all the ages. Those who seek the honor of one another and don't seek the honor that comes from God only. As Jesus said, you cannot serve two masters. Now back in Revelation chapter 3. In verse 10, Jesus carries on and he says, because thou hast kept the word of my patience, I will also keep thee from the hour of temptation, which shall come upon all the world to try them that dwell upon the earth. Now, one thing we've noticed the church at Thyatira and the church in Smyrna is we started getting references to the second coming. And here again, in Philadelphia, we have another reference to the second coming. The hour of temptation that's going to come upon all the world to try them that dwell on the earth. Now, when I read this, I wasn't sure how to understand it. Does this mean that Philadelphia church won't exist coming towards the end, that they're not going to be here when this time of trouble comes? Or are they just going to be kept from the tribulations that are poured out upon the world? And that's something I wasn't sure about how to understand it. But then I looked at this phrase. Where are we? It talks about them that dwell on the earth. Who is this speaking about? Is this talking about everyone or a certain group of people? Can somebody read Revelation 6 verse 10?
And they cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth?
So in that context, who are them that dwell on the earth? What have those that dwell on the earth done?
They're the ones that persecute God's people.
Yep. And can someone turn to Revelation 8 verse 13?
And I looked and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the remaining blast of the trumpet of the three angels who are about to sound.
Now these trumpets are they speak of these judgments that are falling upon the earth. And so here, when it's speaking woe, 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 the three woes unto those that dwell on the earth. Again, it's these judgments that are coming upon the earth. So again, those that dwell on the earth are the ones that these judgments would fall on. So both in chapter 6 and chapter 8, them that dwell on the earth is a way of referring to the wicked, to those who have not received the truth, who stand in opposition to God. Someone turn to Revelation chapter 11, verse 10.
And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them, make merry and send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth.
So again, God had the two prophets going. They were slain in the streets, and those that dwell on the earth rejoice, because the two prophets tormented them that dwell on the earth. Again, those that dwell on the earth here are those that stood in opposition to God's prophets that he sent. Jump through to Revelation 13, verse 8.
Revelation 13, verse 8.
Yep.
And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world.
And yet a similar thing down in verse 14. Talking about the beast, it deceives them that dwell on the earth, that by means of those miracles which he has power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast, which was wounded with the sword and did live. And then Revelation 17, verse 8.
The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is.
So it seems to be pretty consistent when the book of Revelation is referring to those that dwell on the earth. It's not actually referring to everyone, it's referring to specifically those that oppose God. And it seems to refer to those that dwell on the earth, seems to be like a universal reference, because those who are faithful to God are only that remnant. The majority of the world is following after the beast, so it refers to them as those that dwell on the earth. Yes, Ralph?
Well, I suppose God's people are, sitting in heavenly places with Jesus, so they're not really dwelling on the earth, are they? Their thoughts are in heaven.
Now, with that in mind, there is one other time them that dwell on the earth is mentioned in the book of Revelation, and that's Revelation 14:6, the beginning of the three angels' messages. It says, and I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. And when I was looking through it, I first read that, I was like, oh, maybe those that dwell on the earth aren't just referring to those who aren't saved. But then I was like, no, the message is actually sending us to those, to preach the gospel to those who stand in opposition to God. Okay, we're to preach the gospel to those who don't have it and don't know it. And so it's just interesting that them that dwell on the earth are those that slew the prophets under the seals, those who, in chapter 11, slew God's two witnesses, the two prophets that he sent, who are opposed to his people who are starting up this image of the beast and persecuting God's people, again, who wander after the beast, that these are the ones who bring persecution upon us, and these are the ones that God sends us to preach the gospel to. So with that in mind, jumping back into Revelation 3, with the message to the church in Philadelphia, Jesus says, I will also keep thee from the hour of temptation which shall come upon the world to try them that dwell upon the earth. So what is that referring to? When we understand that those that dwell upon the earth are those that have rejected the gospel, those that stand in opposition to Christ and his truth. What is this temptation that will come upon the world to try them?
Is it Revelation 16, the bowls, the final plagues?
Would it be the Sunday law?
Without getting into too much specifics, yes, it's this final time of trouble that have, yes, there are these tests that come out that lead into this time of trouble. Okay, this time of tribulation leading right up to the end, where judgments are being poured out, things are escalating, getting worse and worse, and it's forcing them to make this decision. Okay, and those who end up rejecting, yes, they get those plagues fall out upon them. Okay, so there's this time of trouble leading up to the close of probation, and then this massive, outpouring where the four winds are let go upon the earth, that the angels are holding back in Revelation 7, and that is just this flood of plagues and destructions flood the earth. That is going to be poured out upon those that dwell on the earth. Okay, as a test, as a judgment. But it's saying that the people in Philadelphia will be kept from that. Okay, they're still going to be here. They're living through here. Each of these last three churches we've looked at, the Thyatira, looking at the Catholic Church coming out of the Dark Ages, the church in Sardis being those Reformation churches, and the church at Philadelphia being God's remnant people. Okay, these churches all have references to the second coming in them. But the promise to Philadelphia is that, as it says in Psalms 91, 1,000 shall fall, like thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. Only with thy eyes shall they behold the destruction of the wicked. And then in verse 11, in Revelation 3, verse 11, Jesus carries on with another reference to the second coming. Behold, I come quickly. Hold fast, which thou hast, that no man take thy crown. Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out. And I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, which is New Jerusalem, which cometh down from heaven from my God, and I will write upon him my new name. Now, what do we think of that promise to the overcomer here into the Church of Philadelphia? Out of those promises, what stands out to you the most? Yes, Galen.
To me, it's almost like, where is it? Make us a pillar in the temple of my God. To me, it's like that we are the stones that make up the living temple. And the new name is, I think there's another verse later on that talks about a name written on a stone that no man knows except him that's receiveth it. Oh no, that's the other church. Pergamos. But yeah, it's almost like that we make up the living temple.
Hmm.
It's almost like a
Maybe.
letter, isn't it? The name of the person and where you're going to. The address. It's like the sealing, isn't it, really? Well, you know, that's part of the seal is the name of God.
Hmm. Well, I mean, that's in Revelation 14, 144,000 have the Father's name written on them. That's part of the promise given to him, that Jesus says the name of his God will be written on them. Yes, Petra, and then Stephen.
There's also that special role and that special place for those who are alive when Jesus comes. And a pillar in a temple is not just a part of the temple. It's a special place in the temple. It has to do with strength. So it's like the last work of those that God will do through those who are alive when he comes, those who will be sealed. They have a very special role.
Hmm. Stephen?
There's only one word which it says, he that overcometh, because with an overcometh, that's only trials and temptation, and you stand firm. Will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out, and I will write upon him the name of my God. So whatever actually is overcome it, that's what actually stands. And I believe if you overcome it, then you'll be very, very strong, you know?
Hmm.
Yeah, that's what stands out.
Yeah. Yeah, the strength to overcome. You're a pillar in the temple. I suppose if you do look at it, you know, the temple, you know, whether you look at it as being the church here on earth, or, you know, when God's people overcome and we're built up together as a spiritual house, when we overcome, we gain that victory over sin. We gain victory over doubt, over complacency, over all the things that has been spoken of to these church. That builds a strong church, a strong community of faith that is able to support others, that is able to lift up the church and to lead others to have that same overcoming life, that same faith in God and trust in him. Lolo.
Yeah, I was just thinking, he says, him that overcometh will I make a pillar. So is there something this church knows about God that's foundational, and that Christ will build his church on a knowledge of God that this church knows? Just thinking something along those lines. And then the next part of that verse, he says, and he shall go no more out. I'm wondering, does this have anything to do with the shut door?
I get the idea that the whole go no more out, like we're going out, we're coming in. If you look at the door that Jesus spoke about being the sheep door of the sheepfold, you know, go out, go and come out, find pasture. But having being a pillar in the temple and shall go no more out is the idea that we found our home, we found our resting place, our journey is finished, we've reached that destination, the labor is over. And so, yeah, that's the imagery I get to that. you know, it speaks, I think it's chapter 7 of Revelation, talks about, you know, those will serve God in his temple. Or I might be thinking of chapter 20 in the resurrection, where those arise in the first resurrection, kings and priests, but that they serve God in his temple, you know. I just find that as an amazing promise, where the sanctuary on earth, you know, only the priests could enter the sanctuary, and not even all the tribe of Levite. There was only, you know, the certain families, you know, of Aaron's sons that could be the high priest and could enter into the most holy place, and only once a year. But the promise to the overcomers in there is serving God in his temple, is that we are all invited in there. That door's open, that we'll all be able to go in and serve God in his temple. And here that we won't need to go out again, that God's temple will be a place for us to dwell. And that's something that that goes beyond anything that was promised in the Old Testament type. You know, often you look at the Old Testament, the type, anti-type, and you see, you know, the sacrifice and what that pointed to, and the promise that was awaiting. But every now and then you get something like this that goes beyond anything that the type ever spoke about. The temple of God, the most holy place, will be our dwelling place as well. We can dwell with God in his temple. Ian, and then Petra.
Yeah, Mark asked a question in the chat too about what the name represents here. So maybe we'll address that in a minute too. But in my Bible, like years ago when I studied this 30 years ago, I've written 1833 to 1865 for Philadelphia, and some of the words you've said today sort of fit with that. But that was kind of a critical time in coming to the pillars of our faith as believers, as followers of Christ. Our pioneers actually referred to them the pillars of our faith, and that came from that era. And if you look through, and I was trying to sort of sum up what is an overcomer. If you're a Philadelphian, what is an overcomer, or what is the opposite to an overcomer? And if you look through this passage, you've got, I know your works. Well, the opposite to that would be, I haven't seen any of your works. And then he says that you persevere and that you have a little strength. You know, these people don't have a lot of strength, they got a little strength. And hold fast to what you have. All of these things are almost like, they're not like, I'm revealing these new things to you and you are breaking out with these new ideas. The pillars have been revealed to you, and now persevere in this. Hold fast to what you have. I can see your works. You have a little strength. And he's just saying, keep going, rather than you need to graduate to something new or something different or something better. And I see our church, the Adventist church movement over the last 50 years has tried to just almost reinvent itself and keep looking for something new or something that fits and joins us to some other group. And so we can have this, you know, we can finally fit in, you know, but these people have been told, no, hold fast to what you have. Persevere. You have a little strength. I can see your works. Keep going. Keep persisting. Keep overcoming. And it's a beautiful message, actually.
Just while you're saying that, it just made me think of Jude, that earnestly contend for the faith that was, you know, once delivered to the saints. And that's the message, you know. They had that faith that's been delivered to them, and the message is just keep going with this faith that's been delivered. Petra, did you have a comment?
It was just about the question in the chat, so it's all good.
Okay. So Mark's asked, what does the name represent here? Well, the first thing I find looking at the name here is there's not just one name. You know, he says he'll write upon them 3 names. He says that the name of my God. So Christ is speaking of his Father, and he's calling his Father my God. So Jesus will write upon us the name of his God, the name of the city of his God, and he'll write upon us his new name. So we have the name of the Father, the name of the Son, and the name of New Jerusalem written upon us. I just find that interesting, that the 3 names that are written upon us are Father, Son, and the city of New Jerusalem. That would have been a really great time if Jesus had wanted to tell us something about the Spirit, to write his name on us as well, but it's not. It's Father, Son, and the city of New Jerusalem are written upon us. Yes, Stephen?
Is this talking about? Is it talking about the seal? Because the name of the Father is God, and the city and New Jerusalem, something like that. Yeah, question. It's a question.
Mm-hmm. If we turn to Revelation 14, verse 1. So the 144,000 in verse 7, it says that they've received the seal of the living God. And in chapter 14, verse 1, it tells us, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on Mount Sion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. So this is the seal of the living God, is the name of the Father written in their foreheads. Okay. Interestingly enough, if we jump to Revelation, I think it's 22. '21 or 22. I'll just see if I can find that here. Where are we?
It's 1:22:4.
Yes, there it is. That's the one I was looking for. I was looking right at that. I don't know why I couldn't read that. So yeah, in Revelation 22, spent the new heaven and new earth. In 7 verse 3, and there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servant shall serve him, and they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their foreheads. And so I find that an interesting thing, that the 144,000 have the Father's name written in their foreheads this side of the second coming. You know, leading up to the Great Tribulation, they're sealed with the Father's names. But here in Revelation 22, talking about the end of sin, all of God's servants have his name written in their foreheads. So it's like well, and when we look throughout the Bible, name is often representative of character. Okay, when you know, a character or a significant characteristic about someone. You know, when Jacob, his name meant deceiver or supplanter, had his wrestling with God. Okay, God changed his name to Israel, meaning overcomer. And same as Abram in Genesis 17 had his name changed to Abraham, that the father of nations. And same Sarah had her name, and quite often people had their names changed, or God would choose a specific name for the child, like in the case with Jesus. They shall call his name Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins. The name represents something significant about character or characteristics. And so the same character that is present with all of God's servants in Revelation 22, after sin, okay, in the new heaven and new earth, that is what the 144,000 have this side of the second coming. Okay, they have that character, that Father's name written in their foreheads. And so this is part of the promise that's given to the church in Philadelphia, that if they were to overcome, and as Ian said, what he's saying to them to overcome is just to keep his word. You know, he says, thou hast a little strength, thou hast kept my word, thou hast not denied my name. He says in verse 10, because thou hast kept the word of my patience. Okay, hold fast that which thou hast, that no man take thy crown. Those are and that's the entirety of what Christ is telling this church to do. Okay, if they carry on like that, they will be overcomers, and they will have the Father's name written in their foreheads. Okay, they will be sealed with the seal of the living God. And furthermore, he carries on to say, sealed with his new name and the name of the city of New Jerusalem, the city of God. Now, I have to say, I'm not sure the exact significance of having the name of the city written on their foreheads. If anyone's got any clarity as to the significance of that. The only things that come to my mind are the fact that the name Jerusalem, you know, Salem is from the Hebrew word meaning peace, and the Jah, or for Yahweh or Jehovah, it's meaning the Lord's peace, is what the name Jerusalem means.
I was just thinking, I'm not sure of that answer to that question, but is it on our forehead, on the Philadelphians' foreheads? Only God's name, I think. Somewhere it says Christ's new name is on, isn't it on his thigh? Christ's new name, somewhere in Revelation.
In Revelation 19?
Yeah, somewhere there near the end. But I think I'm not assuming that it's all in our foreheads. I think that the name of the New Jerusalem and Christ's new name might not be on our foreheads.
Actually, that's a good point. That I was yeah, I must have just been reading into that, because it's written elsewhere that a name's on our foreheads. But you're right, it doesn't actually specifically say it's written on our foreheads there. Yes, Stephen.
Yeah, because well, I see here I will write upon him the name of my God, which is the authority. Then is it authority, territory, and what is it again? Yeah, which is the seal. You know, yeah. The territory is the New Jerusalem, is it?
Yeah, it's his dominion, wasn't it?
Something like that.
And I
yeah.
guess heaven and earth is his dominion.
Yeah.
And there was something else in the seal as well, his name, his dominion, and his
title. I think is the three things they say normally on seals:
yeah,
name, dominion, and title.
title. Yeah, oh yeah, creator or something, wasn't it?
And then there's that final line: he that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. So as with every church, at the end it finishes with this line, that we need to make sure we are open to hear the messages to these churches and apply them to us, to ourselves, to our own lives. These messages weren't just for the church living in that time period, that they're also to be applied to everyone's life today. And for me, I get the message from this church that we need to sort of go back to the faith of our fathers, as it were. That faith that was once delivered to the saints, to earnestly contend for that. That God raised up these people, that they were following him. They had not denied his word. They had held fast to his word. And that's what he asks of us, to follow him, to trust in him completely, so that we might be part of this Philadelphia experience.
Isn't there a teaching that this is the actual church that goes through the Laodicean one? Doesn't we have to come back to being Philadelphians or something? Because of the condition of the Laodicean church can't go through to heaven.
I would agree with that. It's interesting if you look at the church in Thyatira. That is the church that came out of the Dark Ages. Okay, the papacy, the Catholic Church. Okay, that's when that church arose, and that's where we first get a reference to the second coming in these 7 churches. It's indicating that that church will be here still when the second coming happens. And we see that today. It's still with us today. And in the prophecies of Revelation, we're going to see that that church is spoken of throughout the book of Revelation. Okay, the first beast that comes up out of the ocean in chapter 13. And then you've got the next church, the Sardis, these Reformation churches, the Protestant churches, the start of this Reformation. Again, we have reference to the second coming, indicating that those churches will be with us, you know, right up until the end. And we see that they're still around us now. And also, they're also present in the book of Revelation. We see that coming up under the second beast, spoken of later as the false prophet. And it's interesting, you've got the beast and the false prophet are working hand in hand to persecute God's people. So you've got these 3 groups: the beast, the false prophet, and God's remnant. Those are the 3 sort of churches that you have going through the book of Revelation. Petra.
I find it interesting too that in Daniel 7 and 8, there is a very strong presence and follow through, especially in Daniel 8, of Greece. You know, we think of Rome being the beast in power, and we know that those 3 are their dominions taken away, but that they carry on living. But it's very clear in Daniel 8, but also in Revelation 13, at that beginning with that beast is a leopard. It has characteristics of the other. And when we look at the characteristics of Greece in our society today, it's very strong. It's just about more visible than the Catholic influence. So you also have in the Church of Philadelphia, that second to last church is basically the foundation of what goes through.